sir.
Wow. It is absolutely humbling to be up here to share this space with incredibly talented dreamers and visionary people, and it's not just up here, it's out there. You guys have been meeting each other all day, and the energy and the enthusiasm, the dream makers. It's, the more I thought about it, the more, from a teacher's perspective, I was like, this is a kindergarten teacher's worst nightmare. Because here we are those students. We're the ones who were in elementary school, were staring out the window and dreaming. And not having our homework done, and we were the ones who were, during recess, were jumping off the monkey bars and being thrown into the nurse's office because we were taking all these risks at recess, and our teachers wanted to pull their hair out and go, what are we going to do with them? And here we all are. It's us. Here we are in this space, and we're shaking up the world. Because as Mark Twain said, never let the walls of the classroom inhibit your education. Because we know that dreams, risk takers, all those things that happen can often happen outside the classroom. And so it's just a privilege to share this space with you. And I know that there's tons of you that could be up here on stage. It's just, there's many of you that I know would love to have this time. And so I thank you for just giving me this short moment just to share some of my story, the risks that I took, the dreams that I have had and still have. One of the first risks that people might say was my first risk was in 2006. I was an English teacher, tennis coach, and I loved it. Teachers out there, it's the best job in the world. It really is. And I left teaching in 2006, and I went to go pick up my camera and my pen and go out into the world to become a humanitarian photographer and storyteller. And it was one of what some people might say, one of the scariest decisions you've had to make. Well, first of all, let me back up and tell you that I taught middle school for 8 years. All right, so there's scarier things than that. But when I picked up my camera, it wasn't the scarier decision would have been to stay where I'm at just because it's safe. You know when you make a decision, and even though you love where you are, you just know the decision's right. And so in 2006, I picked up my camera, and my first stop was Darfur, Sudan. And of course, in 2006 what was going on in Darfur. Of course, you had the genocide. And a videographer and I were thrown into a back of a cargo plane, and we were brought into Darfur, and our job was to storytell. To visually tell what's happening in Darfur at that time. And of course, the images that we saw were heart-wrenching, and they're the things that you would expect to see. But there's something that caught me by surprise. There was a joy. There was a resilience. There was a beauty, a remnant that remained even after the genocide had come through and destroyed villages. I was in an IDP camp, internally displaced people. There were 75,000 people staying there. And one of them was Edward here on the left. And every morning when I'd roll out of my tent and I'd pick up my camera and I'd go out into the bush to document, little Edward would be right behind me with his crutches and his smile. And it dawned on me, genocide can take his leg, it can take lives, but it can't take hope. You can't kill that. There's a joy, and there's something there that my camera was drawn to that I couldn't stop photographing. And so I just photographed the heck out of all the smiles and the joy, and I thought, have people seen this? What do we mostly think of when we think of the developing world, or what many of us call the majority world, because that's how the majority of the world lives. And so I remember getting back on the airplane and taking that long flight back from Africa. If you guys have done that, you know how treacherous that can be. And you fly from Central Africa to Europe, and then you take that flight to New York City. And I'd made this trek, and I landed in New York City, flying for 30 hours, had one flight to catch to make that last flight down to Charlotte. And I missed my connecting flight by 10 minutes. So you've been there, and that flight agent says, sorry, you're late. You're 10 minutes late. The next flight doesn't leave until the next morning. So I spent my first night back in the States on the floor of the JFK airport. And as I'm sitting there, of course, the stories of Edward and hundreds of other stories are rolling through my head, and I couldn't wait. I could not wait to bring these stories home and tell and shout and say, guess what, world, here's what's going on, but there's hope. But in February of 2007, if you remember, our conversation sounded differently here at home. Because as I sat on the floor of the JFK airport, you know how when you're sleeping on the floor at the airports and these news stations are playing over and over the same news? And there were two stories. One, if you remember, there was a blonde by the name of Anna Nicole Smith. And Anna Nicole Smith, of course, had just died. You remember this story. Some of you are already shaking your head. I'd rather forget, right? A week after Anna Nicole Smith died, there was another story. You'd rather forget this one too, wouldn't you? Britney Spears shaving her head. If you remember, 24/7 news coverage of Britney and Anna Nicole Smith. And I'm watching this, and in my mind, I still have these images of Edward, and I'm watching our conversation as a society, as a culture, talk about these blondes. And I'm not talking about entertainment stations, I'm talking about our major news sources. And it dawned on me how much prosperity can blind us. Absolutely blinds us to that which is significant. And so in front of us are things that are irrelevant. And it was on the floor of the JFK airport. There was anger, there was frustration, there was, you've been in this spot before. What can I do? I'm just one, and all I have is a camera. It's a toy, right? I mean, what can I do with the camera to fix this? And it was on the floor of the JFK airport that Silent Images was birthed. Because it was here that I thought, there's other photographers, there's other filmmakers who share this passion and share this desire to tell the stories of hope in the midst of injustice. And so I began to make phone calls. I didn't have the name in mind. I just knew that I wanted to use that tool to bring justice and to bring stories and to educate and to make us go beyond the headlines. And so we gathered photographers, we gathered videographers, and they said, we're in. What can we do? How can we use our gift to tell these stories? And so we began to brainstorm how Silent Images would be structured. And the one thing that we kept coming back to is the danger of this tool, because there's so many tools out there like a camera that can be used for good or bad. And we wanted to make sure that it was used not to steal dignity, but to tell stories. And so we made a commitment then that we said any photograph we take, any film we produce, 100% of the profits are going to go back to the people that we've documented. Because we want to make sure that we maintain that dignity in telling their story, because we're telling their story so that they eventually can have help. And so now, today, our photographers go out and they document human trafficking in Southeast Asia. We continue to document genocide, slavery, poverty, homelessness right here in Charlotte. And we go out and we mobilize artists and filmmakers and photographers to use their gift and their dream to say, how can I use that to tell stories and bring justice? And it's been a privilege. Now, the sad news is that this in 2007 was not the end of the story with what most of our conversations are about. Because in 2011, it did not look that much different, did it? These were the headlines. I took these photographs from the front page of our major news sources. It's embarrassing, isn't it? Absolutely embarrassing. And we realized that we had this insatiable desire for distraction. Anything to distract us from that which is significant, and so the irrelevant is put in front of us. And the people who are out there screaming, hey, pay attention to us. Now, some of you are going, wait a second, David. Sometimes photos are put in front of us. And sometimes they do bring the stories of the world. Now, when those photos come, this is mostly how they look, isn't it? How many of you were watching the coverage of the famine in Somalia, right? I mean, it was like a floodgate for a week. And it was all over us. When's the last time you heard that in the news? Has the famine ended? I just returned from Tanzania about a month ago, and I can tell you it hasn't ended. What about Haiti? Of course, we had the floodgate, and now where is it? I was just in Haiti this summer, and I can tell you that has not changed. And so the problem is that sometimes they'll put in front of us the irrelevant, but also they'll give us the incomplete story. They'll just show us the kid with the pot-bellied kid with the flies all over his face, or they'll show you a skeleton in Darfur. Now listen, I've seen both of these. I've seen this in Darfur, and I've seen the famine in Ethiopia, and these images are real. But this is not the complete story. There are heroes. There is joy. There is hope. There's an opportunity for us to hear those stories and participate, and hopefully that energizes us. And so what our photographers do when we go out is to focus on stories like Grace. I met Grace in Ethiopia while working on our project called Voice of Beauty. And the book's purpose is to document and celebrate the beauty, the dignity, the resilience of the African women. And 100% of the profits from our book sales go back to provide education for girls and microloans for women. And so as I'm doing this project, which was an absolute privilege, to sit down with these women and just say, what's your story? Isn't that a great question to ask? We need to ask that more amongst ourselves. Just what's your story? But I asked Grace, what's your story, Grace? And she starts to tell me about being trafficked. She was in forced prostitution. She was rescued, brought into a home. And so I asked her, well, Grace, what are you going to do now? Now that you've been rescued from the streets and you're no longer in forced prostitution, what is your life going to look like? She said, I want to be a journalist, just like you. She said, I want to go learn how to photograph and take stories so that I can go back to the streets and document the stories of the girls I left behind, and justice can come to help them. What a hero. What an amazing story that we'll never hear that happens in the midst of all these tragic things. And for Grace, there's hundreds of other girls that I was able to meet who wanted to bring that hope back to the streets. While working on a project in northern Uganda, I was in the north working with the child soldiers. And I was documenting the child soldiers who escaped the Lord's Resistance Army. If you're familiar with what's going on in Gulu, Uganda, I was up there and I was documenting these boys who escaped the LRA and are being welcomed back to their villages with open arms. Reconciliation and forgiveness. The story beyond just the horror of what the LRA is doing, but the story of reconciliation in northern Uganda. Well, while I'm in northern Uganda, I get a phone call from a guy in the States, and he says, David, you got to take this 7-hour bus ride. Trust me, it'll be worth it. You take this bus ride down south, and I want you to interview and meet this girl named Fiona and her coach, Robert. So I said, all right, if it's worth it, I'm gonna go do it. So I take this bus ride down south, and I meet Fiona and Robert in the slums of Uganda. And Robert is a soccer coach, but he said, I don't want to bring soccer to, or as they would call football, of course, I don't want to bring that to the slums. I want to bring something that engages the minds of the kids who are in the slums, because there's hope there. They're intelligent. There's wonderful flowers that can blossom out of the grotesque, hard, smelly, just the poverty of the slums. He said, there's hope here. And he said, so I want to start a chess camp. People laughed at him. Chess, come on, they need food, they need water. He said, no, let me engage their minds. So he started this chess camp. And after a while, of course, he had mostly boys doing the chess camp, but then walks Fiona, the only girl. She walks in because she wants a bowl of soup. She doesn't want to learn how to play chess. But he says, Fiona, I also want you to play this game. And she said, well, that's a silly game. That's a boy's game. He said, well, let me just give it a try. So he starts to train her. And he spends several weeks with her, and she gets very, very good. And he holds a slum tournament, and he begins to have her challenge the boys. And ladies, this probably won't surprise you in the room, but guess who won the first slum tournament in chess? That's right, representing the girls, Fiona. But it doesn't stop there. So she goes, he's like, this girl's really good. He goes and submits her to the Ugandan chess championships, the whole country of Uganda. She goes, represents the slums, comes back at 11 years old as the youngest chess champion ever in the history of Uganda. It gets better, because then she qualifies for the continent of Uganda at 12 years old. She goes and represents her country. And she returns at 12 years old as the youngest chess champion ever in the whole continent of Africa. All this, yeah. I mean, what a privilege to walk along someone, not just Fiona, but Robert, right? Because he saw it in her. And out of the slums come stories like this, and this is what we want to capture. This is what we want to put in front of people, to say there is hope and there is partnership, not just handouts, but hand-ups. And so this whole concept of understanding that there are heroes and there are great stories beyond the headlines overseas, my team and I began to brainstorm, what would that look like here? Are there stories here? And so we began to really, and this is where the dream part comes in, we began to say, how could we mobilize something right here in the States to capture stories like this? Because we know that, heroism, often we think of heroism as, when we were a child, I know I was, it was the red cape. I'd put on the red cape, and that made me a hero. And I could fly, and then something happens when we get older, doesn't it? We go to college, we grow up, we become grown-ups, and all of a sudden, that dream of being a hero dies, or even meeting a hero. But Webster defines heroism as somebody with great character and courage. Well, I know some people like that. And so the Sign Images team decided this is what we want to do. This is our big dream for this year, starting right here in Charlotte, but hopefully we'll expand all over, is to say everybody has access to a camera. Most of our work is taking professional photographers and filmmakers, but we thought, how can we mobilize everyone? Because everyone has a story, and everyone has a hero in their community. Hold up if you have a phone that has a camera on it, raise that up. Yeah. So everybody in this room who's holding that up has an opportunity to participate in our Silent Heroes project. Because you have the ability to tell a story. You have the knowledge of somebody in your community who's a hero of sorts, a silent hero, not a CNN hero, right? CNN has these heroes who are like the really thick paintbrushes that are changing our culture in huge ways, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they're the fine paintbrushes. There's also those people who are the fine paintbrushes in our communities that make the canvas beautiful. Let me give you just two quick examples of photographs we've already had come in from people in different communities. And your community could be your school, could be your coffee shop, it could be your soccer field. A photograph came in about Kurt here. Kurt's a CMS bus driver. And he spent his entire summer using his bus driving skills to drive homeless kids to the pool, to summer camp. He doesn't want to get recognized. But somebody said, man, he's changing lives for this community. He's not going to be a CNN hero, but he's an awesome guy. Adelaide here, 9 years old. She rides her bike up and down the street, and every day after school, she goes and she collects, she started a club now, she goes and collects all kinds of trash on the street. And we asked Adelaide, what are you doing? She said, I'm taking it to recycle it. Every day after school, she and her friends. Is she changing that street? She's a hero. What about the Sudanese refugee who works in the 7th Street parking deck, who told me that all he likes to do is just smile to everybody who comes in? He said, that's the best thing I can offer all these bankers as they come in, is my smile. He said, I can't give them anything, but I give them a smile. And you know what? I bet you a lot of them don't even look at him. Don't even recognize what he's trying to give them, but he is a hero in that community. He is trying to leave his prints on there and leave that place better than how he found it. Or what about the youth soccer coach who lost his job, and so he's using his time just to coach an under-10 soccer team? And you know, he can't find a job, but he's going to volunteer. These people are all over the place. Your mind is probably already going as to, I know somebody. And so here's the challenge to us as we go from here, is to say, how can we take these cards and identify a hero in our community, take a photograph of them, and then the cool part is, I want you to take this card and give it to them. And I want them then to go document and photograph somebody who is their hero. Because heroism is often inspired. And the best part is that in 2012, in the Levine Museum of the New South, right here on 7th Street, for 4 months, they've agreed to show all these photographs. And we will have a mosaic of the heroes of Charlotte. From every angle. We taught a photography class to homeless kids this summer, and our first photographs came from the homeless kids on the street telling us who the heroes are on the street. And so the heroes are going to come from everywhere. They're going to come from the top floor of Bank of America. They're going to come from the janitors, from the CMS bus drivers. They're going to come from the coffee shops, the business owners. They're going to come from your streets. And so we invite the city of Charlotte, but we don't want it to stop here, because the dream is that this would catch. And as we go from here, that next year there would be silent heroes of Austin. There'd be silent heroes of Nashville. There'd be silent heroes of Memphis. And so we, as just the common people, with a tool that we have, we can say, you know what? Enough of the headlines that are full of political division, class warfare, racial division, things that pit us against each other, and we can take our cameras and we can say, you know what, that's not what makes our communities great. What makes our communities great are these heroes. They do ordinary things that make our communities extraordinary places to live. Now, do not be deceived, because they're not going to be wearing capes. They're not going to be in Batmobiles. So be vigilant. They're going to be disguised as just regular people like you and me. And so we invite you to celebrate those heroes who make our communities awesome. You can go to this website and check it out. You can upload your photo right there. It takes 10 seconds. So thank you for participating with us to bring the heroes visibly right here in Charlotte.